Scott, let's start with what the Financial Times has reported that Iran is allegedly preparing to strike European countries like Bulgaria and even Cyprus if further escalation occurs. There's also a report that Iran has warned GCC countries it's closely watching developments in the region and would respond if anything happens to them. On top of that, there's been a noticeable increase in American aircraft activity near the Iranian border, suggesting something may be brewing, and Iranian statements themselves seem to reflect concern about a possible new attack. At the same time, looking at Trump's comments over the past couple of days, it's all framed around economic pressure. He said yesterday there are no negotiations happening, which actually lines up with what Iran has been saying. But we also know messages are still being passed to Iran through the Pakistani government, even today. So, what's your read on the situation in Washington, and how do you see Trump wanting to continue this conflict?
You ask a question that's literally impossible to answer in a manner that reflects, I would say, traditional, analysis derived from classic political science. Because to talk about the mood in Washington, what is Washington? Washington, D.C. is the seat of government. The seat of government, of course, is the executive branch and the legislative branch, but the seat of government is also the various departments, organizations, administrations, and then the foundation of the foundational infrastructure that sustains government. We can call it whatever we want, the deep state, but the permanent bureaucracy, supported by academia, supported by various economic institution. I mean, we always talk about, the lobbyists in Washington, D.C. That's part of, the seat of government. It's the heartbeat of America. It's where policy is made in America. And there are processes involved in the making of policy, just to speak about lobbying, the way lobbyists work, to infiltrate ideas into government, into the various deliberative bodies of government, both those established by law and those that aren't. Don't think that, when a bunch of executives get together over lunch to talk about, what, the policy should be about X, Y, and Z, that may not be established by Congress, but that is as much as powerful as any congressional deliberative body, because those people then influence lobbyists who go to Congress and the money that flows and things like this. What I'm trying to say is that's how one normally would evaluate, what's happening. That question, what's happening in Washington, D.C.? To attack that problem, I would take apart Washington, D.C. and then, filter it through the specific policies you're asking about. How is Iran policy made today? Well, it's not made in the traditional manner that Iran policy should be made. For instance, there should be, a directive from the president that's filtered down through the National Security Advisor that's then farmed out to the various, departments or agencies who will then act on that by creating committees, both internal to their agency and committees of an interagency basis that are formed based upon the directive to solve a specific problem. They will then send taskers out. Some of these taskers involve getting economic information. Some involve getting intelligence information, other sources of information. They will inform themselves. They will hold consultations. They bring in people. I've been brought into many deliberative bodies within the interagency process over time to give testimony, to answer questions so that they can, again, empower themselves with knowledge and information to come up with answers to the problem set directed for them to resolve. And they'll work together and come up with a consensus that'll be fed through the president using, the processes of government. Congress will be informed. There will be consultation between the executive and the legislative to make sure there's a balance, and then policy will be made. And then when policy is made, everybody goes, when the president says, execute X, Y, and Z, everybody goes, they know what it is because they said, we were involved in the making of that policy. So when you say, what's going on in Washington, generally would say, how are people responding to actions that then can be compared to the the objectives set by formal policy. What's going on in Washington, D.C.? That's not how it works today, Nima. It works today. The president wakes up and puts out a social media post. That's policy. Staffers no longer attend interagency processes. Staffers wait. They're like a fire brigade waiting for an arsonist to set a fire. And the president is the arsonist. The fire is a social media post. And he'll say something and the people go, well, what do we do? Now they run around and you have people working cross purposes. Is the Treasury Department's sanctioning program coincides with the Department of Defense's, blockade program? Are the two coordinated, or are they just operating independent of one another? Because when the president says, in order to do this, we need certain sanctions to be lifted against Iranians. Has that been filtered down to the Department of War now so that they can allow certain shipping to come through? No, there's just no coordination. They operate totally independent of one another based upon what people think the president wants, based upon social media postings that haven't been sent through a deliberative process. So what's going on in Washington? Total chaos, total anarchy, total confusion. There is no Iran policy. There is no Iran policy because you can't call a day-to-day reactive reality policy. That's just panic. To have a staff member wake up in the morning waiting for a social media post so they can run out and deal with the problem as it emerges is not. What does this president want? I mean, one day we're told we're preparing for a massive strike. The next day we're told that we're lifting sanctions against 3 IRGC people. One day the president's working with Oman to, open up a shipping lane so he can say the Strait of Hormuz is open. The next day he's overreacting to an Omani collaboration with the Iranians about how that would actually be implemented, threatening to bomb Oman. Really? I mean, did you understand what I just said? One day we're going to be working with the Omanis. The next day we're going to be bombing the Omanis. What's happening in Washington, D.C.? Not a frickin' thing. Nothing's happening in Washington, D.C. because it self-negates because of the emotional instability of the madman who currently occupies the White House. That's what's happening in Washington, D.C. Now, let me take a step back because I do believe, even though we have all of this madness, there are certain normative realities that have come into being. If it's just like anything, if you just take a step back and let nature do its thing, nature finds a balance. And I think what we're seeing right now, even though the president is stirring things up, we're finding a policy balance. And again, people can disagree. You may disagree. I don't care. I just say what I think anyways. I think there's a policy balance right now that are based upon certain realities. The reality for the United States is that we cannot. See, whenever people say there's airplanes flying around Iran and we may attack again, with what? With what? Did we magically grow missiles overnight? Did we magically increase the number of long-range strike weapons available to us? No. We know we're down to as close to zero as we can, and we know that there's concern in the Pacific and Europe that we don't have enough weapons to deal. The big question being asked right now in policy circles is, what happens if Russia and China get together and say, screw it, let's do a simultaneous attack? What happens if China says, we're taking Taiwan at the same time the Russians say we're taking the Baltics? Now, I think that's just irresponsible thinking, because neither China nor Russia thinks in those terms. But of course, we tend to mirror image ourselves because we would do that. We would say, now's the time to strike because we're a warmongering bunch of people, Europe and the United States. So we're projecting onto Russia and China our own behaviors. But the problem when answering that question, you have to come up with an answer. And the answer is, if they attack, we got nothing. The realization suddenly that we got nothing except tactical nuclear weapons. That's why Colby is putting forward new policy that says that we will use tactical nuclear weapons preemptive early on in any conventional conflict because we don't have anything. So having said that, unless the president's planning on nuking Iran, and I don't believe he is, what are we going to do? We're not going to attack Iran, not in a military significant fashion. And I'll talk about there will be moments where there will be clashes. And I think this is going to be the new permanent reality. But now let's talk about Iran. So we know the United States is not inclined to carry out a massive military attack against Iran because we can't. We can't sustain it. Iran. You hear a lot of talk. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Iran needs economic stability. You know that. I know that. That's their number one priority. Economic stability over the long term requires, of course, certain realities to emerge in the Middle East, one of which is to get rid of the most destabilizing influence in the Middle East, the United States, and then to make it so that what happened in February never happens again. But we know that there's no MOU. It's dead, has been dead, and there will not be an MOU. That just isn't going to happen. So without an MOU, without a ceasefire, without any understanding, what understanding exists? The understanding of nature, the balancing of America can't continue large-scale military operations against Iran. And Iran needs periods of stability to promote economic, activity, which is necessary for sustainment of national viability. And so what you see is that both sides have gravitated towards an understanding that avoids conflict. Now, because there is no formal agreement and because this is sort of nebulous, you'll see them balancing into each other once in a while. They'll bounce. And when you see that bounce, you suddenly get a moment of conflict. Boom. Bombing this, bombing that, missiles here, missiles there, that self-terminate as they gravitate away from one another, back to the balance. And I think that's the situation we're in right now, where both the United States and Iran acknowledge that there will be no short-term solution. Hell, Iran doesn't even want to talk to Trump for 2 years. All right. So if Iran says that, do you honestly believe that Iran is looking for a 2-year war? No. Iran's looking for 2 years of relative stability to increase their military capabilities. As they said, we're building missiles every day, but also to increase their economic health. They need to rebuild. A lot of stuff was blown up. They need to rebuild it. It's tough to rebuild when you're getting blown up again. And the United States, while we may not be able to defeat Iran, we can blow a lot of things up. We've proven that. I don't think Iran's in the business of getting things blown up anymore. That doesn't mean they'll shy away from a fight, but I don't think Iran's saying, let's have another 2-month sustained bombing campaign where a whole bunch of our infrastructure gets destroyed. They're not looking for that. They're not looking to pick a fight with anybody. They will respond as needed when necessary. But in the meantime, I think we're looking at a period of time up to at least the midterms where you're not going to see a major escalation of violence. You're going to see a maintenance of the status quo, where the United States can proclaim a steel wall that doesn't stop anything. Iran can talk about the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, but it's really not open because it's not open until traffic is flowing through in a normative fashion. And as long as this conflict is there, there won't be normal rates of traffic. That's bad for Iran, by the way. Income generation, Iran generates income by having the Strait of Hormuz open, stuff getting to market. So do the Gulf Arab states. And so you're going to see just the laws of nature come into play, where you're going to get some norms taking place, where things are going to get to an area where both sides are saying, this isn't perfect, but we can live with this. The United States can live with the perception of containment, and Iran can live with a modicum of economic growth. And you're going to be dealing with this, and they're going to collide every once in a while. Things are going to go boom. But this is what we're going to see for a matter of months. I think after the midterm elections, Donald Trump will, again, because we can't escalate, we don't have the ability to do so. I think at that point in time, Donald Trump becomes empowered, depending on the results, to begin to withdraw from the Middle East, which I think is ultimately the direction we're going. I think Iran understands that. And therefore, what's that old saying? Never get in the way of the enemy when they're doing what you want them to do. And in the long-term strategic, I think the United States is looking for unplugging from the Middle East, not doubling down on stupid. And Iran is not going to get in the way. But because none of this exists in a formal agreement, no formal structure designed to keep the two sides apart, there will be a drifting. They will collide. There will be moments of violence, and then they'll drift back apart, because that's the natural balance I think both sides are in right now. That's what I think is happening in Washington, D.C.
If I'm remembering correctly, one Iranian parliament member responded to talk about Iran trying to assassinate Trump by saying, "Why would we need to? The guy's destroying America all on his own." And here's the thing, Scott. Iran isn't actually seeking escalation. They want to manage the situation with Trump, hoping whoever comes next might shift the dynamic. Though we saw the same hope with Biden, and things only got worse. So, what's your take on the Iran-US dynamic in West Asia, especially around the Strait of Hormuz? Trump claims there are alternatives: Texas, Alaska, Louisiana. And Besant talks about pipelines to reduce the strait's importance. But there has to be something practical behind this, and it's hard to see that happening under the current administration.
It's curious. I mean, I don't know too much about pipeline construction, underwater pipeline construction. I'm just a simple Marine. I don't do that kind of stuff for a living. I did follow the construction of the Nord Stream pipeline. I followed it very closely because, as you know, that the United States tried to prevent the Russians from completing, or the consortium that was working with Gazprom to complete that. And so, became knowledgeable of pipeline construction as you watch the pipeline work its way down the Baltic and get closer to the port. What was being done, it was fascinating. The amount of infrastructure that went into that, and the thing is, you got to put ships out there that have to like lower it down there. There's a big ship that does that, and it just lowers it down there. And then you got these guys go down there and they put it together. It sort of implies stability, though. I would have a hard time imagining one of these ships lowering a pipe as an Iranian cruise missile was slamming into it. So I'm always struck when people talk about making these underground pipelines. How the hell are you going to do that? Because they just don't grow themselves. It's not like Jack and the Beanstalk, and you throw a couple magic beans out there, throw water on it. Next thing you know, you got an underground pipeline. You're like, whoa, how'd that happen? I don't know, magic. And it takes years to do this. I mean, there's no way an underground pipeline would take place in the administration of Donald Trump. So right off the bat, you know that Scott Besant is smoking dope. He's lying. There will be no underground pipeline that emerges in a way that impacts the current crisis of the Strait of Hormuz. First of all, I can pretty much guarantee you that you can't build an underground pipeline in times of war. Okay, that just isn't going to happen. And so, gosh, there's a problem, Scott, because you're building the underground pipeline because you can't open up the Strait of Hormuz because you have insufficient military capacity to do so. So if you can't open up you can't open the Strait of Hormuz because you lack the military power to do so, how are you going to protect the assets building the underground pipe? It's just crazy sometimes how people talk and nobody thinks through the problem. Again, I'm just a simple Marine. I don't claim to know about anything, but I pretty much can guarantee you can't build an underwater pipeline in a time of war because all your assets will be sunk. That's straight up. Went off. Feed that initial question. I had the answer. It's right on the tip of my tongue.
It really comes down to the Strait of Hormuz. The question is, Trump keeps insisting there are alternatives, which is what he keeps bringing up.
Okay, now I got it. I'm there. Well, again, let's just the alternative. The alternative, what, Texas? So we're going to create. It's again the inherent inconsistency and insanity of Donald Trump. Why are we opposing Russia in Ukraine today? Because the Russian people that live in the former territories of eastern Ukraine woke up one morning to find out that the constitutionally elected president of Ukraine was no longer in power because the CIA and National Endowment for Democracy and other outside agencies fomented a coup d'etat, a violent coup d'etat, by the way, that they tried to blame on Yanukovych and the Berkut police, but it turns out it was the Nazi snipers that killed everybody, not the Ukraine. And we empowered these Nazis to come in who hated Russians and to outlaw the Russian language and began killing Russians. They called the Russian speakers of Eastern Ukraine anti-terrorists, and they implemented an anti-terrorist operation that sent the military against these people. So they rounded up to defend themselves, and then implementing basic human right that has been set forth in the Charter of the United Nations of self-determination. They eventually said, we don't want to be part of this Nazi regime in Ukraine that bans everything we stand for. We want to be independent. And later on, they want to be part of Russia. So they went through these processes and Russia intervened. And we said, you can't do that about territorial integrity, sovereignty. I mean, these are big core issues for America, right? What's the president saying now? That we're just going to go in and declare the Strait of Hormuz to be American territory? That we're going to, we're going to have a referendum? Is he proposing a referendum? That's curious. Are the Iranian people going to get to vote in that referendum? Do you think the Omani people would actually vote in favor of that referendum? Qatar, the United Arab Emirates? the man's insane, literally insane. And anybody who promulgates this thinking is irresponsible in the extreme. This concept should be dismissed outright, dismissed, and he should be ignored. Nobody should react to anything he says. Just ignore him, because it's a non-starter. You can't even begin to get to where he wants to get. First of all, the thing about Texas, Mr. President, is you need to have a guy named Sam Houston that kicks the crap out of Santa Ana. Okay, it's sort of what made Texas Texas. The ability of Texas to actually break free of Mexico. You need to win a war. You haven't done that. You haven't won a war. You lost a war. You didn't win a war. You lost a war. In order to have Alaska, you have to have a country that actually owns the totality of the territory, willing to sell it to you legally. Now, if the Strait of Hormuz was a singularity, meaning its own standalone nation, we might have something to go on here. The president might be able to say, let's talk to the Strait of Hormuz. Let's talk to the nation, the Hormuz people, and get them to decide they want to be part of America. All you Hormuzians over there, join America. Yay. Maybe. But the Strait of Hormuz is not a singularity. Last time I checked, there's a whole bunch of lines on a map saying this belongs to this country, this belongs to that country, and none of them get along. They don't. So it's a non-starter. The Strait of Hormuz is actually, again, come back to what we talked about earlier. It's a self-solving problem, to be honest. If I were advising the President of the United States, knowing that politically it's impossible for him to admit defeat, I would tell the United States Navy to prepare for a 2-year presence in the Arabian Sea, and we'll call it the Wall of Steel, Operation Wall of Steel. Now, we know it's not a Wall of Steel, but we're just going to call it the Operation Wall of Steel, and we're not going to talk about it. We're just going to say it's there. So every day the president can send out a thing that says, we're maintaining our blockade against Iran, 100% success. Never bring the debt. Don't talk about the details. Just say it. Maintaining our blockade of Iran, 100% success. So now we have a policy of the maintenance of the blockade of Iran. And that causes some problems for the Iranians, insurance issues and things of that nature. Then don't do a damn thing. Let the Strait of Hormuz solve itself. Because what will happen is all the nations in the Gulf will get together and say, how do we get ships to flow through here? Kuwait needs ships to flow through there. I'm just telling you, UAE isn't going to build any magic underwater pipeline. 2 years, that's Trump's term. That's when the Iranians aren't talking to him. In 2 years, in less than 2 years, in 6 months, the Strait of Hormuz problem will resolve itself if the United States does nothing other than maintain a blockade. And when I say maintain a blockade, just park ships there. Hell, I don't know, every week go ahead and board one just for fun. Just to make it everybody know, tell the Navy, go out there and board a ship. Board a ship. Navy will love to because they're bored out there as long as you feed them. And we seem to have a problem feeding our sailors. But if we can feed them, they'll go board a ship and they'll produce a video and CNN will play it. And the American people will say, my God, we're maintaining one hell of a blockade. Meanwhile, the Strait of Hormuz opens up. And instead of having 13% of capacity flowing through, we'll have close to 100% capacity. It won't be 100 because Iran isn't going to allow shipping affiliated with Israel or the United States to go through. But you'll see the other states say we need peace with Iran. We need normal relations, and they'll start establishing it. The Strait of Hormuz solves itself in Iran's favor if nothing is done, and that's what I would advise the president. Just don't do anything. Let Mother Nature run its course. When I was in college, I always laughed about the way the sidewalks were laid out, because I'd come out of my dorm and there'd be a sidewalk just going straight up there. And I'm like, well, how the hell did they decide to put the sidewalk that way? And then I talked to one of the managers. They said, well, back when in the day, because it's a college that was made in the 1700s, students just walked to classroom, and students take the most practical route. And all we did is take a photograph above, and we said, that's where our sidewalks are going to go. We're just going to lay down sidewalks where the students naturally go. Nature takes its course. Let the Strait of Hormuz define itself. If you do this, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, They're all going to come together and say, what do we need to do? Because we all benefit with the strait being open. How do we make this happen so that everybody, and this will not just lead to economic understandings, but political understandings as well. And again, from the United States perspective, we lost a war. The question is, how do we clean it up? The more we try to intervene now to force an issue with a weak hand, it doesn't work. Give it 6 months of doing nothing. Let Mother Nature decide what's going to happen. And then come in and say, all right, now that you've created this, how can we unplug without disrupting this? And that's the key, to be as least disruptive as possible to something that is operating to the economic benefit of the collective, of the world, of the United States. This is what I would advise the president. It's a damn good, it's the way to go. But he's not going to do it because this president has to be in control and people are going to wake up and piss him off in the morning. I mean, again, Oman, 1 minute we're working with the Omanis on how to negotiate passage to the Strait. Next minute we're bombing them or threatening to bomb them. How do you do this? 1 minute with the Iranians, we're lifting sanctions on the IRGC. The next minute we're talking about resuming a massive bombing campaign. I mean, this is the kind of policy inconsistency that creates paralysis. I think Iran in the long term is going to allow Mother Nature to run its course. Iran's already taken the approach that I've recommended, just hands off. Trump, we're not dealing with him. We're not dealing with Trump. We're just going to let Mother Nature do its thing. And if the United States did that as well, Mother Nature, the natural course of events, because everything works on a pattern. I mean, people need to eat. That means we're going to find ways to get food to the table, which means that people are going to collaborate on how to get crops, picked, processed, and transported. And you just let the natural course of things decide this. People need fuel. People need these things. We already have infrastructure in place that will naturally gravitate to meeting the needs of the collective if we just let it do its business without, imposing wars on it to be disruptive. We lost a war. The United States lost a war. There's people out there that don't want to admit it, but we lost a war. The best thing to do right now is figure out how we can repair the damage done by conflict. And the best way is to ensure that there is no future conflict. And the best way is just to let the locals. How do you stop this may not work with gang wars, but how do you stop, a local fight? Get the outsiders the hell out of the way. Remove the outside pressure. And you'll find that locals will come up with compromises that allow things to happen so that life returns to normalcy. Local solutions are the best solutions. And right now, the Strait of Hormuz needs a local solution, not one that's dictated by a mad, insane, cult leader in Washington, D.C.
What do you make of what's happened with the Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier, Scott? There's a new MSNBC report claiming the carrier wasn't resupplied because Secretary Pete Hegseth misled Trump about the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet in Bahrain being completely destroyed by Iranian strikes.
Yeah, here's the thing, though. Let's just start with the basic evidence. Photographs have been put out there. I mean, people like Trita Parsi, you know who Trita Parsi is. He's promulgated photographs. Other people put out photographs. They're just straight up fabrications. You can't put a picture of a photo of a flap on an airplane with people writing things on the flap. I mean, obviously they'd never been on board an aircraft carrier, understanding that the aircraft maintainers would never allow a plane to get that dirty to begin with. We clean our airplanes, believe it or not. But first of all, that wasn't on an aircraft carrier. That's not a carrier-borne airplane. That photo was taken on the ground. That's not a carrier-borne aircraft. So it's a fabrication. Which now you have to add, wait a minute, are people out there fabricating? There was a photo of a cafeteria. It's not on any aircraft carrier, any ship. You don't have cinder blocks and all this kind of crap. So we know that there's data being put out there that is supposed to be from concerned family members about what's going on to Abraham Lincoln. So right off the bat, we got a problem. Two, here's the collapse of that story. Where is Bahrain? Now, you're smart enough to know that Bahrain is north of the Strait of Hormuz, in the middle of the Persian Gulf. So let's say, hypothetically speaking, I had warehouses full of sustainment in Bahrain. And I got an aircraft carrier that's south of the Strait of Hormuz. How am I supposed to get that stuff to the aircraft carrier? Because it ain't coming north, and I ain't moving anything south. So already it's stupid. Because I'm telling you right now, the Abraham Lincoln's sustainability was not linked to Bahrain in any way, shape, or form other than administratively through paperwork. That there are no warehouses full of tampons and food and things of that nature in Bahrain waiting to be transloaded onto the ship. So that's just a straight up lie. All right. There is a facility in I believe in the south of Saudi Arabia, where the Navy has built warehouses that are used. They can have aircraft fly in, load up, and fly out. And that may have been impacted by, threatened by Iranian missiles, although I didn't see any evidence of any Iranian missiles striking that. But they're trying to say that Bahrain got blown up. You couldn't use this facility because of missiles, so they went out to Diego Garcia. And, in Diego Garcia, the stuff was there, but it couldn't get to the ship. And I'm like, well, that's not true. We have ships that are designed to resupply. It doesn't take forever to retask one. We have them in the U.S. Navy. They might not be as many as we used to have, but God, it is an aircraft carrier in a combat zone, sort of like the number one support priority in the United States Navy. So the notion that we couldn't get a ship out there, and worst case, what I just get a whole bunch of the Greyhounds, the resupply planes, and I get 50 of them, and I just fly them in. Load them up, fly them in. They land, offload, take off, go back. Easy said, easy done. So there's a lot about this Abraham Lincoln story that just smells like 100% BS. Do you have morale problems on a ship that's been extended that long? Hell yeah. Could there be maintenance issues on board that ship? Yes, there could be. I'm not saying there are, because once I've seen a fabricated photograph, I become suspicious of all the videos I've seen. Remember, it's 5,000 plus, or thousands of people on that ship, and you're showing me 5 clogged toilets, and you want me to believe that automatically translates to the totality of the ship? The entire story doesn't make any sense whatsoever. What I see are people trying to create it's information warfare. There are people who are against this war, and I'm on that side. I'm against the war too, but they're using this as an example to create dissension inside. I'd normally, me, I would not speak up in defense of the Trump administration or Pete Hegseth or the Department of War, Department of Navy. But the facts are the facts. And this Abraham Lincoln story just smells of a fabrication. I'm not saying there isn't morale problems. I think there are. I think you're going to, God forbid, when the data comes out, you're going to see a whole bunch of divorces coming out of this deployment because it was extended. People need to understand that when U.S. Navy in peacetime goes out on a deployment, things happen. Families relocate. People go to, children get put in schools. And again, because people don't want to be disruptive to families, if the ship goes out in the middle of a school year, the wife and the kids might actually move to mom and dad's place before the carrier deploys, so the kids can get started in a new school district. And then they're planning on staying for a certain period of time, and then coming back, and plans are made. Budgets are done. And suddenly the ship isn't, daddy ain't home, and you can't come home now. So now you're stuck there for another semester because you can't, if daddy does come home, you can't. And then the wife just says, screw it. It's not like I have a husband here anyways. I might as well not have a husband. Goodbye. We're staying here. And, and next thing you know, the guy gets a Dear John letter or Dear John email or Dear John video while he's deployed, and he gets depressed. People have been blowing their brains out on deployment over Dear John letters for a long time. Guys killed themselves in Vietnam. Guys killed themselves in the Gulf War. Guys killed themselves in our Operation Iraqi Freedom. Guys killed themselves in Afghanistan. Love does strange things. And those letters aren't easy to receive. And this is where you need good leadership. Leadership to, not just on the ship, but leadership ashore. Leadership that predicts this kind of thing. That wife should never be surprised. The military should have done a better job, should have kept the wife on the base. And in that school district, and then people supporting. So when the husband isn't home, there's a support network that comes in. That's the way we used to do business. But apparently that's all gone to hell. So when you extend the ship, and this is where Donald Trump is just flat out wrong, where he said they're not deployed long enough. Well, he's never been on a deployment. So what the hell does he know? But the point is, when you do stuff like this, when you mess with deployments, you mess with the lives of not just the sailors, but you mess with the lives of the families. And this has ramifications that impact morale. So I'm not sitting here saying that the issue of bad morale on board the Abraham Lincoln is fake. I think there are elements on the ship that are impacted. But I'll also tell you this, that an aircraft carrier is a unique weapon system, and it is a system. It has aircraft, but those aircraft are facilitated. The operation of the aircraft are facilitated by teams of sailors who are some of the most professional people in the world. This is their life. They launch airplanes, they recover airplanes, they maintain airplanes, and they load ammunition, and they're very proud of their work. And these aren't people that tend to wake up in the morning depressed. They tend to wake up whenever their shift is on and get out there and do their shift. And they take pride in that. We launched aircraft, we recovered aircraft, we did this. And these people aren't, the idea that the Abraham Lincoln has a systemic morale problem is just absolute 100% crap. Because I've worked with squadrons and I know these people. And yeah, the deployment is there, but this is a combat mission. And I'm just here to tell you, people may get upset about this, but the guys dropping the bombs don't give a damn who they're dropping bombs on. They were told to drop a bomb. Whether they're dropping a bomb on the Houthi in Yemen, on Iraq, on Iran, on Hezbollah, they don't care. They have a mission. Launch the aircraft, get the airplane to the target, drop the munitions on the target in a way that deals with the target the way it's supposed to be dealt, recover and get ready to rinse and repeat and do again tomorrow. Welcome to the reality of war. If you think for a moment that these guys are waking up going, why are we bombing Iran? No. You don't live long in a war zone when you start thinking like that. You got to think about, okay, I got to get my crew rest. I got to get up. All right, I got to fly. What are my flight parameters? What's the threat model? What's the intelligence say? How am I going to defeat the surface-to-air missile threat? How am I going to stay outside the range of this radar? This is what goes through the minds of military professionals, and these are military professionals we're talking about. And these guys are operating on a daily basis, on a sustained basis in a wartime situation. Now, you can get them drunk at a bar afterwards and they'll say that was a long deployment, and maybe at that time they've reflected on why we went to war with Iran and they read up on it. But right now, I can just promise you that the vast majority of the sailors on the Abraham Lincoln are doing their damn job. They're doing their damn job. They're not, these whimpering little babies. And again, I have to say, the fact that we have fake photographs being put out there leads me to believe that a lot of what we're hearing about the Abraham Lincoln is just deliberate misinformation designed to affect the morale of the Navy and undermine, President Trump. And again, I'm not saying that it's wrong to undermine bad policy, but yeah, you sort of have to do it in an honest way. And there's a lot about this Abraham Lincoln story that just makes no sense to me.
There's also a Washington Post report saying the Pentagon is assessing whether to reduce the U.S. military presence in the Persian Gulf, considering shifting forces toward Jordan, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. The question is, how far can they realistically go with that? Because moving to Saudi Arabia doesn't exactly get them out of range of Iranian missiles either. So how do you see the outcome of this so far, given the American bases in the region? I'm sure they're seriously weighing what's happening and what steps they'll need to take in the near future.
Well, we have two issues. One, we have a military issue, and the other one, we have a political problem. The military issue sort of solves itself. Until we have a peace with Iran, we can't reoccupy in a meaningful fashion the bases that have been largely destroyed by Iran. So now you have to ask yourself as a military guy, how do I accomplish my mission with reduced infrastructure? Where do I relocate my forces? And this is what's happening. We're pulling back to Jordan, to air bases in Jordan. We're pulling into Saudi Arabia, and we're pulling some assets into Israel, and we're pulling some assets into Europe. Crete, Cyprus, Bulgaria, Romania. We're moving in that direction. This is just a temporary thing, though, because then the question is, what is our military mission? And that is where politics comes into play. I believe that there's a recognition that we cannot sustain a conflict with Iran over time. And I also think that there's a recognition that the United States lacks the capacity to reorient the totality of its military infrastructure so that we could have the ability to project into the Middle East meaningful military power capable of solving the problems that we can't solve today, like seizure of the Strait of Hormuz, occupation of Iran's nuclear facilities, and the elimination of Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. We don't have a military solution to those problems, which means that it's irresponsible to say that that's now our military mission. I think the military mission will be redefined based upon strategic political objectives. And right now, the first strategic political objective is how do we get out of the Middle East in the least disruptive way? How do we get out of the Middle East in the least disruptive way? And one way is through retrograde operations towards Europe, meaning we move towards Jordan and Israel. But that's not sustainable. I mean, what is Jordan? Is Jordan part of Europe? Is Jordan part of the Middle East, of West Asia? And of course, they're part of Middle East and West Asia, which means eventually Jordan will have to gravitate towards this. Is what happened in, when we talked about Syria and Iraq and American military presence in Syria. I always said the moment Iraq becomes unsustainable, Syria is resolved. And look what happened. Iraq became unsustainable. We're out of Syria in a heartbeat. Solved its problem. Kuwait's now unsustainable. We're out of Iraq. And now that, which means we're out of Bahrain. Logistically unsustainable. Can't happen. So we'll fall back. Saudi Arabia, I don't know how much longer we're going to be there, but, Saudi Arabia has begun to look elsewhere for its strategic security requirements. It now has this pact with Turkey and Pakistan. There are alternatives to American weaponry out there that Saudi Arabia can buy into if necessary. We have energy issues that, even though we're not buying Saudi energy today, it impacts the global energy security market. So we may hold on to Saudi Arabia, hold on to a military posture. So Saudi Arabia, I just remind the people they can't fight. Just remember that. It's not like, when we withdraw from Saudi Arabia, the Saudi army is going, we got this, boss. We got it. We're the Saudi army. We're strong. We lift weights every day. We run 6 miles with heavy weights on our back. We're ready to fight. No, these are the fat guys that get wiped out by Ansarallah every time they go head to head. All right. And Saudi Arabia knows that if they're left exposed, they're going to lose southern Saudi Arabia. Southern Saudi Arabia used to be part of Yemen, and the Yemeni may decide to come and take it. I know during the Gulf War, in the run up in the fall of 1990, we sent the 7th Marine Amphibious Brigade to Saudi Arabia, Eastern Saudi Arabia, and they set up. We're going to stop the Iraqis if they come down. So we got 1 brigade of Marines. I think we had another brigade of airborne out there someplace, and we're going up against several divisions of the Iraqi Republican Guard. Now, Marines are pretty damn good, Nima, and I will never shy away from a fight. Give me a K-bar, I'll take on a tank any day, but I'll die. They'll give me a medal, bury me nicely, whatever remains of me. But Marines aren't going to run away from a fight. But we knew what we were. We were speed bumps. If the Iraqis had decided to drive south, there was nothing we could do to stop them. Straight up reality. So we're sitting there going, hey, Saudi Arabia, by the way, we're in your country to help you. And you got this army down there hanging out by the Yemeni border. Why don't you bring some of those brigades up here, at least pretend like you want to fight with us and die with us to defend your country? And the Saudis were going, no, because those are Yemenis. We're scared of them. We're not leaving our border unprotected. This is the reality. So Saudi Arabia has to deal with the Yemen problem. Now, Pakistan, there was some talk a couple years ago, I think, where Saudi Arabia, made a big deal about getting the Pakistanis to deploy one of their divisions to help out in Yemen. And the Pakis said no. And that caused a little bit of a brouhaha. But Saudi Arabia is dependent upon Pakistan for manpower at the officer rank especially. And what we could see, as long as it doesn't involve the deployment of Pakistani troops into Yemen, because I think Pakistan will reject that. But we could see with this new pact where Pakistani troops come in and help, secure Saudi's border with Yemen, and this might give the Saudi Arabians more confidence, and maybe the Pakistani Air Force can come in and help reinforce the Saudi Air Force and the security of Saudi airspace. And when that happens, then and Turkey here, because here's another big one. People never think about this, but I'll ask you: how many? Let's just do some basic questions. Is Qatar and Saudi Arabia, are they friends? And the answer is no, not at all. Has Saudi Arabia threatened Qatar militarily in the past?
No.
How many troops does Turkey maintain on Qatari soil? Thousands. Why? To protect Qatar from Saudi Arabia. But I thought Turkey and Saudi Arabia just signed a defense pact. See, it's not as easy as it looks, ladies and gentlemen. It's actually a pretty complicated situation. I think once the Saudis and the Turks can actually resolve some of their regional differences, Saudi Arabia will feel confident enough to tell the Americans to leave. But in the meantime, America is one giant security blanket. I mean, I used to have a blanket when I was a kid. It's still one of the most traumatic moments of my life. I had this blanket, and it was my little blanket. And I carried that blanket everywhere. I was just sitting there sucking my thumb with my blanket. And I had that blanket as a child. And I remember I got to kindergarten, I had that blanket. And I'm moving into first grade. And this blanket is no longer a blanket because I used to pick at the fuzz too. That was my thing. I had the blanket. I would pick at the fuzz, make little fuzz balls and all that. And one day my mom came in and saw this threadbare thing on there. And she said, no. And she threw that blanket away. Boom, my world ended. I mean, that was it. I no longer had my blanket. It was just impossible for me to live. Now, eventually I grew up and got away with it. But the United States is that security blanket to Saudi Arabia. And right now it's sort of threadbare. Saudi Arabia's been picking the fuzz at it. But they still need that blanket to go to bed tonight. They still suck their thumb. At some point in time, in order to get rid of that blanket, they're going to have something else that's going to replace it. And is it going to be this pact, this Turkish-Pakistani pact? I don't know, because there's some inherent problems. Again, Pakistan's already told the Saudis to pound sand when it comes to providing troops to resolve the Yemen situation. What kind of ally does that? And Turkey's got troops deployed to Qatar to fight the Saudis in case they make a move on Qatar. What kind of ally is that? So this isn't what it all seems to be, everybody. We know it's not about Iran. Everybody said, even the Iranians are like, that doesn't bother us. But what's it about? Israel? Or it's just about they don't know what to do because there's now a psychological vacuum in the security realm because the United States has got their butts handed to them by the Iranians. And everybody's going, how do we live going on? So they're trying to construct something. We'll see. But eventually, I believe the United States will have to leave Saudi Arabia as well because Saudi Arabia is no longer going to be focused, gravitated towards the United States. They're going to be shifting their focus of attention elsewhere. But they've got a lot of problems they have to resolve. Remember what I said earlier about letting Mother Nature run its course? You know who's pretty good at that? One of the best Mother Nature practitioners of foreign policy in the world today, China. China's pretty good about just saying, let it happen. Let's see what happens. See, you know how China does, you know what BRICS is? I mean, not BRICS, but BRI? Belt and
Road Initiative.
Belt and Roads Initiative, yeah. It's the equivalent I talked about in my college. See, China's got this big, giant, hypothetical satellite above there taking a picture of the global economy. And they look at it and they go, I don't have to invent trade routes. They exist. I just need to take control of them. Build a port here, build a port there, connectivity, things flow through naturally. Why don't we do this? So if you take a look at Belt and Roads Initiative and look at how China has overlaid its thing, it's all done upon the natural flow of the global economy. China's not trying to force anything. China's just taking advantage of what exists and making it function even better. I mean, look what they just did. Nobody's talking about it too much, but China set up this company now that is doing scheduled service from Chinese ports into Europe using the Northeast Passage around Russia. 20 days, I think, is what it takes as opposed to 40 plus days. So it cut the time in half. Costs are lower. It's just the Chinese doing it better than anybody else. On a scale. I mean, anybody can say, well, I ran a ship through there. Well, China's just running a ship. They're running ships. It's a big line giant container ships going through, taking advantage of Russia's 43 icebreakers, including several nuclear power icebreakers. And China's on good relations with the Russians, which means that their icebreaker fees are going to be lower, and they lower the cost of doing it. It's just called letting. The Chinese are really good at this. And the Chinese right now, when they look at the Middle East, remember, they got the Saudis and the Iranians to have a rapprochement once, because it's the natural course of things. See, the United States is the antithesis of the natural course of things. We try to create friction. We purposely create friction so that we have nations fighting each other, because we've decided it's best to sell weapons and permanently keep the region unstable. But what happened there? It leads to a Strait of Hormuz type situation, which isn't just bad for America, bad for the world, bad for the region. And the United States now is the problem, not the solution. So what is the solution? Stop trying to force things. Let Mother Nature run its course, and it will happen. And the Chinese, when that happens, the Chinese sort of moving, because they're the best in the world at saying, hey, let's let it run its course. They'll figure out what's the best pathway and all this stuff, and things will run at maximum efficiency. That's your solution. Get the United States the hell out of there, especially with this current leadership.